Hello and welcome to the Media Podcast. We're your weekly media club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. On the show today, it's all things radio as we decamp to Bauer's shiny new studios in Euston to unpick the latest RAJAR listening figures and glean why commercial radio is on the up. Also on the programme, publishers take aim at the BBC's podcast ad plans, plus why working class creatives aren't getting the chances they used to. And in the media quiz, we pit people against places. That's all coming up in this edition of the Media Podcast. In the news this week, Redbird IMI's chief Jeff Zucker hit out at the UK government on Wednesday, saying that they were scared of his £600 million deal to take over the Telegraph Media Group. Speaking at the Sir Harry Evans Investigative Journalism Summit, Zucker said, "It's surprising to me at a time when journalism needs investment, capital, innovation and experience, where that's what we're able to bring to the table." The BBC has agreed to pay an undisclosed sum to the former chauffeur of Diana, Princess of Wales. This followed claims of slander by journalist Martin Bashir during a meeting in 1995, where he had told the Princess that Steve Davis feeds the Today newspaper. He was sacked soon without explanation. And the actress who played Supergran, Gudrun Ure, has died at the age of 98. 27 episodes were produced of the ITV kids drama in the mid-80s and was syndicated to over 60 countries. Well, thanks to the internet, the Media Podcast is syndicated almost everywhere. And today we welcome back to the programme broadcast consultant Paul Robinson. Hello, Paul.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for squeezing us in between meetings.
Not a problem at this magnificent building, which is absolutely glorious, and I would never guess where I am.
There is a little bit of branding here, a little bit of branding.
Very nice.
Where have you been in the world recently?
I had a little trip to Cannes, which is a little modest little hop. Nowhere really. I've been hanging around London. I've been trying not to go to Heathrow. So far succeeding.
And what's keeping you busy?
We launched a new service for kids in Indonesia last week. That was quite big.
That's quite a big market, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 300 million people, 97% Islamic population. So, there's all sorts of issues there about content, what you can and cannot do. But it's a big market, growing market. And really interesting, they're really becoming very business friendly. They're doing a lot of work to attract people. And across Southeast Asia, I think Jakarta will become as big a hub as Singapore, probably in 10, 20 years' time. But they're definitely going for it. Nice place to go? Yeah, lovely food. Nasi lemak, nasi goreng, very nice, but don't go during Ramadan because you can't eat a thing.
And next, Paul, is another Paul, and that's Paul Sylvester, a content director at Absolute Radio, a part of the Bauer Media Group, where we are today. Thank you for inviting us.
Welcome to the new building. Welcome to the Lantern.
Well, we're going to talk a bit more about it a bit later, but it's been quite a busy time here at Bauer. Some news this week about the departure of, I guess, your boss, Ben Cooper.
He is my boss.
He has flown the coop, so to speak.
Terrible pun. Ben's leaving us after 4 years. He joined during COVID. And I think, his achievements have been great. He's unified a very fragmented portfolio. He's brought everyone together in terms of the content teams. And I think he's worked really hard at that. It used to be very much London and not London. And Ben's made a real impact in bringing those different parts of the business together. I think you look at the success of Greatest Hits, some of the brilliant talent acquisitions, a real commitment from Ben towards D&I and improving us and also making it a more digital focus within our content and not just thinking about the radio, how it looks, how people experience it has been very much part of his mission during the 4 years here, and he leaves with record listening figures, and he's been a really good person to work for. I've enjoyed it.
So who's your new boss going to be then?
I don't know yet.
Is it going to be you, Paul? Are you going to take over the other stations?
I am not going to be my own boss. I'm not even my own boss outside of work, never mind inside of work.
So it's been a fascinating quarter for radio listening. It's not just me who thinks that. The listeners, I'm sure, are very excited as well. RAJAR is the body that measures radio's listening figures, marks the homework, and they released their latest survey to the public yesterday. Mr. Robinson, commercial radio, sort of in its ascendance, 3/4 of the stations gaining reach were commercial this year, and half the BBC stations were in decline. Is that an accurate representation of what's happening?
I think it is. It's quite remarkable, the commercial radio share, 54.2%. I remember when I was at the BBC, we were talking about when will commercial radio get to 50? You know, you're now well over the 50. The clear blue water was then, as it described it, as you're really over that. 54.2 is an amazing number. So commercial radio should be absolutely celebrating. And what's interesting is how, you know, both the big groups, Global and Bauer, have both done very well. And you've got record numbers in all sorts of different areas. The BBC, you know, struggling a bit. And I think we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but particularly BBC Local Radio and Radio 2, you know, not the powerhouses they were.
But is that okay? Is it okay that the BBC is on the sort of 45% side, still reaches large numbers of the population?
Well, here's a good question. When I was head of strategy for radio, BBC Radio, we actually used to ask that question. At what point does it become unsustainable to have BBC Radio, and at what point do we have a problem? And of course, the answer then was a different answer, because the answer then was that BBC One had a reach of 98%.
The telly
had 98%. So everybody was touched by the BBC. That is no longer the case. You know, the core TV networks, the linear networks are going down. So the reach of radio actually, I would argue, is now more important than it was before. And particularly what the BBC have done is they've made changes to local radio, BBC Radio 2, which are services targeting older audiences who traditionally have always been, I'd say, stronger BBC advocates. Commercial radio was always much stronger with younger people, BBC stronger with older people, as a very general, you know, story. That's changed a bit. But I think the BBC are really upsetting, you know, what were their core audiences, and that's a problem.
Well, I think if you looked at Radio 2, though, I think Radio 2 over the course of the last year would probably be really happy with these numbers. I don't think they will necessarily...
Still the biggest radio station in the country.
And it's not even close to anybody else. And I actually think, you know, there was a lot of doom mongers when Ken left Radio 2 to come to Bauer, of this was going to be the end. How many millions would Radio 2 lose? The fact is they haven't.
No, you're right. I think Paul's totally right.
And I think they will look at that change, they'll look at the evolution of Radio 2 and go, okay, we'll take this.
So historically, commercial radio didn't really do older audiences. That wasn't kind of the focus kind of commercially. Now you've got a One End Boom launching, doing sort of over 65s, Greatest Hits, Smooth there as well. Why has commercial radio suddenly gone, actually, this lot, we'll go after them?
Because older people have got more money to spend, and older people spend more time listening to the radio, and older people love this medium, and so it is a commercial decision in so many different ways, but also it's an attractive proposition for listeners and for radio stations to be able to do this. And fundamentally, you know, everyone was after 2544s. You know, every radio station was 2544 all the way through, and actually the people just above and just below have got more money to spend and are really passionate about that. And mainstream brands want to target those people. So therefore, the radio stations have moved to be able to commercially deliver on that audience that is there.
Is commercial radio abandoning younger audiences to do that, though?
No, I don't think they are. From my perspective, and working in this building, obviously I work with KISS. And yes, you know, KISS and KISS3 and KISS Fresh. I think we're not abandoning audiences, and you look at, again, at Leicester Square with the extensions to Capitol and what have you. I think there is an investment in it. I think there is also an investment in reaching those audiences in a different way, digitally, socially, through video content, as well as through the mainstream radio. But you look at some of the great talent signings at both Capitol and KISS, bringing in people like Jordan North to do Capitol Breakfast, and Marvin and Alex Scott coming into the KISS brand, that actually, no, I don't think there is that. If that was the case, you wouldn't see the talent acquisition that we're getting.
One of the things we've seen is the changing way people listen to the radio. So top line figure, amazing, 89% of the country tuning into the radio each week, the highest ever UK radio reach. But online listening has now exceeded AM, FM listening. That's quite a moment, Paul, isn't it?
It is a moment. I mean, the fact it's exceeded AM and FM. I mean, I think AM, not a surprise, but FM as well. Extraordinary. I mean, and it's been moving in that direction, obviously, for a while, and this is just the next step, but it's now physically overtaken. I mean, there is now a massive supply of online listening. I mean, everyone is now jumping in, and of course you can do so without all of the barriers to entry that used to be, having to apply for a license and lack of spectrum and all of that. I think it'd be interesting at some point to see exactly what goes into that online number, because we don't really know exactly, do we? All the stations that aren't actually in RAJAR, they're going to be increasing this large bucket of other listening, and we don't really know what that is. So I think at some point it'd be lovely to know what that is. But it's fascinating, and I think also seeing smart speakers, continue to come up. That's really interesting. How voice activation has driven that, and it will continue to do so, I'm sure. So
smart speakers account for 60% of that internet radio listening.
Yeah.
Paul, do you think about those smart speaker listeners more and more?
All the time. 15 million people in the UK are listening to the radio through their smart speaker. And again, I think you target that, and is there a radio station in the UK that doesn't have on your smart speaker as part of their news jingle?
Not anymore.
And also you've got Radio 2 doing a TV campaign at the moment talking about BBC Sounds using Zoe to promote smart speaker listening. And I think it is a really easy way for people to listen. My mum and dad are 84 and 82 respectively. They don't have a radio in their house anymore. They just have their smart speaker, and that's how they access all of the radio. It helps because they're not so mobile, and they can just shout at it, and she moves and she changes and she gives them what they want. So I think absolutely we look at that in terms of the content we're creating. But also what smart speakers give you is the opportunity to go further with the audience. So we have a game on the breakfast show on Absolute Radio called 5 Words, 5 Grand, which is a brilliant, easy to play along mechanic. And then what we then did was develop a smart speaker skill that was an extension of that. So, 5 Words goes from being a 10-minute bit on the radio every morning at 7:30 to you being able to play it with your mates if you're having a party at home on a Friday or a Saturday night. And, the success of that means that Dave Berry has uttered 5 million words via smart speaker to the listeners.
It's a great stat.
Which is a brilliant way of taking the radio, taking a smart speaker piece of technology and actually extending the radio brand into it. So I think it will continue to grow. But you look at that growth, 16% growth in smart speaker reach in the last year. From within our own business, 6 million Bauer listeners accessing, up 18%. I think, it's a real marker now of where we are listening and how we are listening.
So the biggest way people listen to the radio is through DAB. So that's the most, about 40%, I think. Then you've got internet, and you've got AM and FM. I was looking at it, and I was looking at where people listen to the radio. And I think often listeners think that the car is the main place people listen to the radio, but actually it's in home. That's strengthened sort of since the pandemic. More people kind of working from home. We sort of own the box in the corner, radio does. Whether it's a smart speaker, an FM radio, or a DAB radio, there's something about the passive nature of radio that's kind of kept it successful, Paul?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's always been the fact you can do something else, can't you, while you're actually listening to the radio. You can put it on whatever you're doing, whether you're cooking or you've got people round or, you're working in the garage or, whatever you're doing in the garden, the radio can be on, entertaining you. And if you're doing a job, for example, say you're a painter and decorator, the radio is absolutely de rigueur, isn't it? The first thing you do, you put your pots of paint down. Not that I'm a decorator, but I'm seeing this. And then there's the radio, splattered with paint, and the radio goes on. They've got Absolute Radio on or whatever, and that's the way you get entertained. Look, I mean, I think there's something about that we should never forget. And in fact, despite everything, all this change in terms of supply of services, change of platforms, the move away from broadcast, which is what DAB is really, that's the bit that's hanging on, isn't it? The actual fundamentals of something that's going to keep you a good companion, going to entertain you, provide you with key information, play good music, great personalities, that you can do something else to while you're doing, that has not changed.
What's interesting, about the figures of where people are listening. I was doing some, because I am a geek and I love this kind of stuff, actually looking at breakfast audiences by day and at work listening by day, okay? So the breakfast show on Absolute Radio has a higher percentage of audience listening earlier in car on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays.
I wonder why that might be.
Not Mondays and Fridays. But actually, the peak of listening is higher on Mondays and Fridays for at home, because that's where it is. But I think it's now we're really starting to see a post-COVID return to normal, but you've still got those vagaries of a hybrid working situation for so many people that actually it's really fascinating when you dive into that. Well, it's fascinating for someone like me.
Moving to podcasts, commercial radio and alongside some podcasters have written a letter to the BBC saying they are unhappy about their plans to insert adverts into BBC Podcast off-platform. This is to Apple and Spotify. Paul Robinson, people are quite annoyed by this, aren't they?
They are. I mean, they're claiming three constituencies, consumers, licence fee payers, the creative economy. I think there's a big risk for the BBC. I mean, the BBC, if it takes advertising, government may well say, hey, I tell you what, do more of that. Let's reduce the licence fee. You've started with a podcast. Now let's put advertising onto, your main services or onto the iPlayer or whatever it is. So that is an issue. I mean, clearly, the commercial sector is concerned of a migration of money to the BBC. I mean, that's the other problem, isn't it? I mean, the BBC keeps its licence fee. It's £4 billion a year. And now it's dipping its toe in the advertising pot. Is the advertising market going to grow to support this additional source of inventory? And the answer is it may do, but not immediately. So certainly short term, it's going to deprive presumably independent producers, non-BBC producers, and might indeed reduce the diversity, reduce the range. I mean, the beautiful thing about podcasting is, there's a podcast for you, isn't there? However narrow your interest, there's something that is for you. And that's the joy of podcasting and that sort of intimacy and, the fact it's not quite so produced. It's just a bit more conversational. And of course, some of these are working on very tight margins, these podcasts. So you take away the advertising and they could just disappear. So you could massively lose choice, I think.
I don't want Melvin Bragg to get any of my money.
Well, there you go.
Paul, Bauer is a signatory to this. Do you think it's important?
Of course it's important. I think you've got to look at... The BBC obviously has to find new ways to earn money, because the world is not going to stay the same. And I think we all have to accept they need to do that. But right now, they can't really have their cake and eat it in that sense. As Paul says, it's double dipping, really. It's getting money from everywhere. And I think that is difficult. It's difficult for already a fairly small, in the grand scheme of things, market that's available, and the scale of the BBC jumping in to take some of that. I think obviously commercial radio has a say in that, and obviously commercial radio won't want that to happen. But I also agree with Paul that actually it's the independents, it's the production companies, it's the smaller players in the market who could potentially risk losing substantial revenue and potentially not exist, and that isn't good.
There was a report by Channel 4 News this week, you might have seen it, suggesting that just 1 in 12 media creatives are from a working class background. The survey covered the film, TV and radio industries. And they sort of consider it to be like the lowest in a decade. Things aren't getting better. Paul, when you look at that, what do you think about how media is structured?
As the son of a Scunthorpe steel worker, I look at it and go, it isn't easy. I think it has got more difficult. And I think what is something of a shame is things like Channel 4 pulling things like Steph's Packed Lunch out of Leeds. And you think, actually, there are fewer opportunities. There are fewer opportunities for people who think, that's a show I'd like to work on, or that's an industry, or there's people who look like me, who act like me, who are like me, to be able to do that. I think there's a few kind of glimmers of hope of people like Joe Lycett, who moved his production to Birmingham and wanted to give people who, young people in Birmingham, an opportunity. I think it is a very difficult thing. I think we all have to work harder. And I think there are things in place that are encouraging for people that we are moving in the right direction. We're not moving quick enough.
Do you think about it when you're advertising roles or you're interviewing people or work experience schemes about how people can kind of fund themselves as they take up those opportunities? Because that's not something we thought about in the past, was it?
No, absolutely. And I think we have, we've worked within Bauer, there's the Bauer Academy, which has helped, it's worked with 20,000 people. It's helped 200 people from different backgrounds get into Bauer, get into media jobs. You look at things like the Global Academy as well, which is also doing that. I think we are doing more for it, but we're not moving quick enough. And I think we have to, using things like the Social Mobility Pledge, actually bring more experts in to help educate us. Because I think there is still an education gap before we even get to that. But I think there is a movement in the right direction. These figures don't surprise me.
Paul Robinson, purely from a self-motivated perspective, all these organisations want viewers and listeners that represent the country. Surely it is more sensible to push this up the list of things they should do.
Absolutely. There's no way you can possibly represent all audiences if everyone who's working on shows behind the scenes is middle-class white. It doesn't work. I'm a little surprised by this because, in fact, I think the portrayal on air has got better. I think if you look at radio stations 20 years ago, it was all men. It really was. You look at the lineup, it was all men. That's not the case now. You look on TV and you do see a lot more women. You see people from different backgrounds. You don't see people who are just of a particular stereotype, not all with, Queen's English, different dialects, different accents. So I'm a bit surprised because I think portrayal has improved on there. I wonder whether it's a problem about entry level. I mean, is it that, we're not bringing as many people in? I mean, look, AI may be a threat. There may be other threats to bringing in people at a junior level. Is that an issue? And then I think the report was interesting, saying that when people from certain groups did come and work, they found it very difficult. They found it challenging because they felt the people around them were not like them. And they obviously didn't feel welcomed. So there's an issue there about those who are already there, embracing the idea of bringing in people from different backgrounds and those skills and those experiences adding to the diversity and the wealth of experience in the building. So I think, it's down to all of us also to make sure that we are welcoming, accommodating, and maybe, it's a bit like sort of dress too, isn't it? You don't judge someone who maybe looks different to you because they're dressed in a different way, just because they're different. You've got to be accepting of a broader way of working and different ways of working. And I think that's down to all of us. So I'm surprised it's gone down. I mean, as Paul says, I agree with everything he said. More effort required. And that's not just about recruitment. It's about the environments in which people work.
And we'll be back with more from Paul and Paul after this. Welcome back, and Paul Sylvester is still here for a little deep dive into the happenings at Bauer. Thank you again for the invite into your lovely new studios. Must be nice to have everybody together.
Very much so, and I think, lots of people were so attached to one golden square as a building. And obviously it came with lots of history and lots of radio history and lots of culture. But fundamentally, it didn't work anymore as a building. In so many ways, we were on so many different levels. You could go months without seeing people. And I think the joy of this building and the joy of the way it's been configured with studios means everyone's together, programming teams are together. It's not like it's Absolute on the first floor and Kiss on the fourth floor. We all sit together, we're all part of each other's stories and journeys and conversations, which I think is really exciting. But yeah, it's really great to then have the ease of access of being able to bring guests in, flip the studios, bring everyone in. It's safe, it's secure, it's good for that experience. It's good for guest experience.
Have you ever had a moment where you go, oh, didn't know they had that person in. Why aren't they coming over to my radio station?
Liz Hurley. Liz Hurley was in. And you kind of go, who's that? Look, oh, God, that's Liz Hurley. And you do that anyway when you work in any kind of those buildings. But yeah, when you're literally, the lift doors open and Liz Hurley walks out, you go, is she here for us? Who's she here for?
I suppose all the mags are here as well, aren't they?
So the magazines are all here as well. And I think it's certainly been a real interesting time for the magazines to get used to the fact that, Sam Thompson's walking around, or Marvin Humes walks in, or Alex Scott from Kiss, or Ronan's around and what have you. So I think, yeah, it's certainly, because we share the building with other non-Bauer companies, I think they sometimes think, what on earth is happening upstairs? But no, it's great. And it's just nice to have good studios, digitally forward-thinking studios all together, and just the flexibility.
Well, if you want to see how some of them look, hop onto our YouTube channel and you can see this podcast. Busy week for Absolute Radio this week, Mental Health Week. It's been something you've been supporting for a few years. What was the journey to get there and make it part of your brand?
I think I saw a stat about 6 or 7 years ago, and that stat was that the biggest killer of men aged 25 to 44 is depression and suicide. And obviously for Absolute, more so then was absolutely our core focused audience. And that really shocked me. And also there was a really interesting statistic about how they were the most hard to reach group when it comes to talking about mental health. And so we really experimented really softly at just starting to feed it in. And every time we talked about it, somebody got in touch to say how much it had meant to them. And so we then started to really weave it into programming. So you don't expect an entertainment breakfast show like Dave Berry to be talking about mental health at 8:10 on a Monday morning. But actually, the more we juxtaposed it into the entertainment content, the more it came through, because people were surprised to hear that amongst two songs at breakfast. And I think we've just got more ambitious and more ambitious, because actually, the more we do it, the more feedback we get that's really positive. And I think radio really, it's such an intimate medium in the first place, that people are either listening to it on their own and they choose to because they do feel lonely. And certainly after the last 4 or 5 years that we've had, or they're listening to it in a car and it can spark a conversation. So I think radio works for it, and I think Absolute can work for it because of the storytellers that we have on the station.
Has it made it easier to do as the topic is kind of more acceptable in society?
I don't know. I think for us, it's always felt natural to be able to do it because of the lineup we've got and the way we've always approached it. I think it probably is a little bit more natural because it's so much a part of the conversation. But when you get feedback from listeners that say, I didn't think I was going to make it through the week, and actually you being really open, and certainly last year when we talked a lot about presenter anxiety and stuff like that, it really resonated. And then this year, the theme overall is movement for mental health, which doesn't work so well on the radio.
Yes.
When you're talking about anxiety or loneliness as the themes, that really works. So we kind of picked our own theme this year, which was how to talk to children about mental health. Because again, we started to see that kids were learning about it at school, but then potentially that was where it stopped and people weren't talking about it at home. So we wanted to use our parent presenters to be able to kind of spark those conversations. And then we got in touch. We had a lovely conversation
we had a good chat, didn't we?
In January about whether Absolute and Fun Kids could team up to create a bedtime story, because we know how to talk to teenagers. That's an easier conversation in some ways, but how do you start to talk to little ones about that? And delighted that we managed to work our way around it. We've got our bedtime story narrated by Jason Manford that's going out on both stations. And I think it's one of those lovely things that actually it's a really nice radio collaboration between two stations you would never expect to work together on something like this, and I think it's really nice.
As I was in the office today, had Absolute on, and Ben did a lovely plug for it, and a nice mention for Fun Kids too, so thank you very much for that. I think also it is nice, and obviously we talked about RAJAR earlier too. There is a lot that brings radio together, and there's lots we compete with each other, but it's nice to remember that we're one sector.
And we don't do it enough. There, and obviously because there's different groups and different brands and competing brands, we don't do enough. But I think, you go back to the days where we did the one big radio station post tsunami, and we've done water aid and loads of stuff like that. And I think we should do more of it. And I'm a real advocate for it, and always wanting to do more stuff. I just think it's interesting, and I think it benefits the listener. It
does, and also, I think listeners find it fun. They find it, it's almost naughty that the stations are doing stuff together.
And I think certainly being in this building, you will start to see. So last week for Cash for Kids Day on the Breakfast Show, we had Ronan Keating and Sam Thompson with Dave Berry doing 5 words, $5,000 for charity. And it was certainly a real, oh God, Ronan's on, and I think there's something for the radio geeks, of which, there are plenty, and we love them and we are them.
What?
I think there is something for the listeners as well, of it just being a bit fun. But no, I think we need to do more collaborations.
And something like Cash for Kids, how does that work? Is it sort of forced upon you as a radio station from HQ, or is it like come up with your own take on it? Because all the stations sort of into it now.
Yeah, I think obviously as we want to move as one, and we will always do that, and it's really important for the business. It does a great job, and Cash for Kids Day is super important. But I think the other great thing about Cash for Kids as a charity, obviously they have the big campaign in the summer, they have the big Mission Christmas, which feeds so many thousands of people, at Christmas, and also gets presents for kids who wouldn't have them. But Cash for Kids are a great partner for us when we want to do something that is awareness raising outside of that as well. So last year we did a campaign about period poverty. Again, who'd have thought that Absolute Radio would be doing that? But we did, and we worked with Cash for Kids, and they're really good at helping us to campaign, helping us to raise awareness, and giving us facts, information, and support when we want to do things. So it's only fair that we give that back and we support them, because they're lovely people who do brilliant work.
And the other thing I was looking at, something you've been doing across a lot of the Bauer radio stations is premium. So premium is where listeners can pay $3.99 a month,
Correct.
and it takes ads out of the majority of the radio stations.
Takes ads
the
out of the
network.
service and also gives you skip functions and gives you access to extra radio stations.
I thought it was interesting when Ken joined Greatest Hits. There's always sort of an interesting thing when we try and attract BBC listeners to commercial radio. Obviously, the commercials can get in the way, but this does provide a way for people to remove them. Do you think it's going to be a core part of the business in the future, or is it sort of there as just something, if listeners want it, they've got that option?
I think it will continue to grow and be part of it. It will never, ever replace the main way in which commercial radio makes its revenue by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it's a really important, interesting offering for the superfans of radio stations and for people who don't like the adverts. Here is an alternative.
Is it a massive faff to get it to work?
No. No, it really isn't. You know, you forget that some of the complicated tech stuff that Absolute's always pioneered,
Yes.
that actually this is fine. This is really easy. And what it's really interesting at doing actually is launching different premium stations to see what works. It's a really good test bed to see, actually, that's interesting. Oh, that one did really well. That one worked. We've launched it free and it will become a premium station for Mental Health Awareness Week, a calm station, which is just soundscapes.
Okay, nice.
So it is birdsong and roaring fires, but we're seeing how that will work and, we can see where that goes in the future. So I think, stations like Ken's Secret 60s and that kind of stuff, or Absolute Radio, we do a summer station or a Halloween. The biggest one we've done was for Halloween.
Halloween, that's interesting, isn't it?
So Absolute Radio, Halloween.
Are there enough Halloween songs?
There isn't. There is plenty. Don't you worry. It may get a bit tenuous in places, but there's plenty of songs to make a station.
And I guess all that's going into the new app. So
Yes, yeah.
Rayo, your new app, has been talked about for quite a while.
Yep.
Any launch on the horizon?
Launch is coming soon.
Okay.
I know Simon's talked about it being June publicly, so that's out there. And I think, look, we needed to do it. It had to happen.
So this is going to be an app that kind of brings together all of the Bauer stations in the UK. So I guess things like
Correct.
Global Player or BBC Sounds are sort of
Correct,
similar
yeah.
type services.
And I think there will be obviously ways to personalise it, ways to make it your Rayo, and you choose the stations, your favourites, the playlists, all of those kind of things. But yeah, it will bring everything from an audio perspective from the UK into one place. Premium will form part of it, as part of the launch, and then get better. But yeah, and we'll launch with some really exciting content and really fun stuff that I think will obviously encourage people, hopefully, to download it.
So you're a station boss. You obviously look after the Absolute Radio brand. Does sometimes you think, I'd quite like to have my own thing rather than being part of something else? Or do the benefits sort of outweigh the desire to sort of own your own space?
I think there is only so far you can go on your own. And I think Absolute found that, in its early days. When we launched as Absolute back in 2008, there was only so much you can do. And I think, when we were acquired by Bauer in 2013, it opened up a lot of doors for us, and it's opened up access to many new things. Obviously, you want to do things your own way, but no, I think you have to understand that to be bigger, to grow, to be able to develop, to be able to at the forefront of technology and get the clients on, make the revenue, drive the audience, that actually the scale of a company like this does make a difference to us. And so I think, you always want to take what's given and make it personalised a little bit.
Yep.
And we always do. And I think that's fine. Nobody disagrees with that. Everyone wants to be able to make that work for themselves. But I think that the scale certainly outweighs, any possible disadvantages.
Yes, and you talk about kind of commercial there. What's the commercial market like at the moment for radio stations?
It certainly had a much stronger start to this year than it did last year. And I think that's really interesting, both from an airtime perspective, but also from an S&P perspective. When you look at this time last year, the briefs weren't coming in. And obviously it was a bit of a stop-start year. Now, Q1 this year was great. we got a lot of briefs come in and we converted a lot of those briefs. And I think, we will see how the year pans out. It's a much more short-term market than it has been in the past. And there's a quicker turnaround. But I think there are people out there wanting to spend good money and understanding how radio can do that. And I think, across the board, I get visibility on the briefs, not just for Absolute, as we provide kind of creative solutions to that, but across the business. So I think that's really good.
Okay, Paul Robinson's been waiting patiently for the biggest event of the week. Yes, it's time for the media quiz. This week we're playing Unexpected Places. I'm going to name a place and you tell me which media property or talent could unexpectedly make an appearance. So buzz in with your names if you think you know the answer.
That's not going to work, is it?
Oh, geez. Paul 1, Paul 2. So buzz in with your name and number if you know the answer. Right. So Paul, you will say...
Paul 1. I'm not a number. I'm not number 6.
You're a free man. And Paul will say...
I'll say Paul 2.
Okay, here we go. Let's play Unexpected Places. Question number 1, celebrity traitors.
Paul 1.
Yes, Paul 1.
It's Liz Truss.
Yes.
Apparently she's thought she might be a good candidate. This is Stephen Lambert, who said, it's important on the show, I'm reading here, to be able to tell the truth, also not to tell the truth, and she would be challenged, possibly.
Have we not all suffered enough?
I think we have. I mean, more Truss, no thank you.
But then again, on that, her book has sold abysmally in the UK, so we don't care. And Farage didn't really set the ratings alight on I'm a Celebrity. So I think people want the escapism from politics. I would suggest if she's going to go on any show that is going to really drive an audience, stick her in the jungle and let her eat testicle.
She added £500 to my mortgage. Anyway, question number 2. UK edition of The New Yorker magazine, who unexpectedly popped up.
That is Lucy Letby.
You gonna buzz in?
Paul 2. That is
Paul
Lucy
2.
Letby.
It is Lucy Letby, currently facing a retrial and with reporting restrictions in the UK. Paul 1, so it's on newsstands, which quite possibly puts it in contempt of court.
Yes, this is the New Yorker talking about Lucy Letby, and there are two conflicting legal views on this. One lawyer has said that if you publish online and you do not have a publishing base in the UK, although Condé Nast does, but the New Yorker doesn't, then there's no problem. However, another lawyer said there's no difference between publishing online and publishing in print, and therefore you're in contempt of court. So the question is, are the New Yorker in contempt of court? Are Condé Nast in contempt of court?
Well, we'll wait and see. Question number 3, who unexpectedly popped up on Disney+.
That will be Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney.
I'm sorry, Paul.
Oh, Paul 2. Paul 2.
Paul 2. There isn't a Paul 3. Paul 2, yes.
Paul 2 says...
he's very good, Paul 3.
He's better at this than I am. Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney for the new series of Welcome to Wrexham.
Yes, that's right.
It's one of those weird programmes where you know what happens. Because we all know, we all knew that they got promoted to the league last year. We all still watched it because we're invested in the story. And what's great is Rob and Ryan are really good. But for me, it's the community of Wrexham. And sometimes they do almost beautiful snapshot postcards that have got nothing to do with the football team or the football
beautiful
club.
Postcard in Wrexham.
It's
really?
a beautiful postcard of a
Sounds a bit of an
story.
uphill struggle.
I've
never been to Wrexham.
I'm not sure necessarily this will drive you there.
I listened to March of Sound. Does that count?
It will show you that there are some wonderful people and stories. But it's like
Scunthorpe.
Always like all steel towns and mining towns. But it's got a great pub and a great landlord. And,
it's got a pub. It's okay.
And great characters.
Paul 1. I mean, it's a great format. Taking Hollywood glitterati and popping them in a sort of fish out of water type place.
And actually, doing stories about football teams is very, very difficult. Lots of people have tried. This somehow does capture the imagination. 4th season, it's going to go on and on, isn't it?
It's almost done. Ryan and Rob give you what Sunderland Till I Die, which was the Netflix equivalent and forerunner, didn't have, because it's got the personality. It's got the hook for my other half will watch it, despite not being a football fan, because it's got Ryan and Rob and it's quite knockabout. But it is that, take a celebrity, put them in a weird situation, and it's working. Clarkson's Farm is the biggest TV show around at the moment because of all of that, and put other brilliant characters in it.
As they
Great
say in
telly.
Hollywood, a classic fish out of water style.
Well, congratulations, Paul. You're the winner of the quiz.
Which Paul?
Paul 2.
There you go.
You're going to be masterminding a fish out of water story with the two Pauls, going somewhere around the world. Come back with us to
Don't
your
make us
ideas.
play football, please.
And we will pitch it out to all the streamers.
Okay.
Thank you very much, both, for joining us. Thank you for the invite. Where can people keep up with what you and Absolute are doing?
We are Absolute Radio, and I am Paul Sylvester 75 on Twitter, or X, or whatever we call it these days.
Another Paul.
I'm doing this panel at PACT next week about
Oh.
children's television, about how to keep kids safe, otherwise LinkedIn.
Lovely. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And if you're new to the show, why not follow us to make sure you get every new episode? My name is Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. Thanks to James Walker and Bauer Media for hosting us. It was a Rethink Audio production. I'll see you next week.